Were you diagnosed before or after your children?
After. So I was that nerdy girl who used to read books while she walked and walk into lockers and fall and walk in the ditches. I was putting gifted in kindergarten. And so sometimes you can have some neurodivergence in the past in your family, bipolar disorder or something. And the diagnosis process, oh my God, it is the most bureaucratic. There's so much paperwork. There's so many meetings. There's so many wait lists. There's an appointment with your insurance company to figure out what clinic you can go to. And so with navigating autism in communities of color, when we're talking about that, we really have to be aware of the fact that culturally, how autism shows up for us can be different. Hey. And when she rolled down to school, you know that she's gonna school all of you fools. She's so slow and light.
Let's go.
All right, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Beyond the Science. We are back live in studio here in Atlanta, Georgia.
Yes, sir.
I'm your host, Jerron Trotman, joined by my fantastic co-hosts, Joseph Adams and Darius Cooper. As always, I want to remind our audience of our mission and vision before we dive into our really special session that we have today. Our mission at Beyond the Science is to amplify the voices of diverse individuals within the field of ABA. We aim to address and dissect the unique challenges, systemic barriers, and cultural nuances that impact various communities. By providing a platform for insightful discussions, expert interviews, and personal narratives, we strive to foster understanding, inspire change, and promote diversity and inclusivity in ABA. Now, today we have a special guest with us. We're honored to have Natasha Nelson, also known as Supernova Mama, joining us. She's a certified positive discipline educator, a disability advocate, and the founder of Supernova Parenting, a national nonprofit dedicated to supporting families of color, navigating neurodivergence, intellectual and development disabilities, and mental health challenges. As a mother of 2 autistic Black daughters and being neurodivergent herself, Natasha brings both personal and professional expertise to her advocacy. She's been featured in groundbreaking documentary, Navigating Autism in Communities of Color, which explores the unique challenges faced by Black families in obtaining autism diagnosis and accessing essential services. Her work not only sheds light on these systemic barriers, but also offers a powerful vision for a future where Black communities can access support they need without barriers. Her dedication to disability, social justice, coupled with her personal experiences, makes her a pivotal voice in advocating for inclusivity and accessible support for marginalized communities. And we're excited to dive into journey today with her. Fellas, let's welcome Natasha to the show.
Thank you. That was, I do all that?
Yeah. really get those things going, find them up.
Yes. And I'm super, super excited to jump into this episode. You know, we got to talk before the episode, but there's a lot of things that you were doing that are just amazing. And I think sometimes we get caught up in the moment and we don't realize how amazing the things that we're doing are, you know? So we also very much appreciate you coming on and taking the time today to come and have these conversations with us. And I'm super excited to jump into the episode. So I would just like to, if you can give the audience a little background of who Supernova Mom is.
Ooh, well, first, Supernova Mama is the oldest of 7 children to a single mother in Northwest Georgia. That's always going to be important because it frames why I care so much, why I've always been about caring about children, because I was a surrogate mother to 6 siblings. And outside of that, I'm also a certified positive discipline educator in classrooms, in homes, and in early childhood education centers. I am a NAMI support group facilitator for families, which is basically the National Alliance for Mental Illness in the United States. I'm also a HOPE facilitator. A lot of people don't know about HOPE, but I'm going to put you on today. It is healthy outcomes from positive experiences. And what it is something that has started in California to combat ACEs. We've seen how ACEs are affecting especially families of color, young children and families in poverty. And so the idea at first was trauma-informed care, the idea of understanding where they were coming from. But we want to be solution-oriented. That's kind of behaviorism, right? And so what is the way forward? And what we found with research is that certain individuals who, even if they have a large amount of ACEs, if they have certain positive outcomes and experiences in their life, they still manage to have a healthy future. And so the idea is to work with a child, no matter how many ACEs they have, in families, and incorporating healthy outcomes from positive experiences. And so that's another one of the ones I'm very happy to have. I'm also a veteran. I did 7 years in the military.
Yes, stop it up for that, guys.
I am a mother of 2 autistic children. And finally, I am a disabled Black woman. I have autism, I have ADHD, I have OCD. I'm closing my eyes because I got to visualize all of my PTSD. I have somatic syndrome disorder, and I have general anxiety disorder. So what I do is, one, try to be a disability advocate to let people see that they're not alone and that it doesn't look a certain way, because I get tired of y'all telling me I don't look like I'm autistic. And then also, I try to be an advocate for families because I have 2 daughters who are autistic, and my oldest daughter has autism and ADHD. And so I try to advocate coming from both of those perspectives. And the last thing I do is try to be a bridge or an intercession, because we have a lot of conflict between parents of children who have neurodivergence, intellectual developmental disabilities, and mental illness, and people who themselves have neurodivergence or intellectual developmental disabilities and mental health challenges. And there doesn't really seem, they don't want to see each other's sides. The adults who have these things don't understand the complications that come with parenting a child who has those things. The parents who don't want to hear where the adults are coming from and the things that they were harmed in and the history of some of the treatments and things that have happened. And so I try to be a bridge for that as well, because I wear all these intersections of hats.
And that's amazing. So I wanna ask, right? Because you touched on that. You also are neurodivergent. An adult on the autism spectrum. So what is that experience like for you as a parent, right? Because assume sometimes you get overstimulated, and sometimes there's things that, like, for you, it's like this is too much. So how do you deal with that as a mother, and then having a child who's also on the spectrum with ADHD?
So I tell my parents, because this is why I specifically work with the set of parents I do, that you kind of do have to put on your oxygen mask first. Like you have to do what you're telling your child to do. You have to model what you're telling your child to do. And so just today, we didn't have any power. And my daughter woke up because after breakfast, she gets an hour of tablet time. And she was like, hey, this ain't working. Because she's minimal speaking. So it's literally her coming with the tablet like, fix, power on. And I was like, ma'am, it's not gonna work. And she, of course, she throws the tablet. I'm like, and I was like, oh, power ain't working. I'm supposed to be at this podcast. I need to do my makeup. It's dark hair. All these things are happening. So I start getting, and then I had to take a moment, and I was just like, I need to calm down, Paris. And so before I could attend to her, who was still having that tantrum, I literally had to get myself back together because I was about to lose it. Then be able to get down with her, tell her we going to the calming corner so we can cope and jump and do whatever we need to do to calm down. And then say, okay, it's not working. What can we do instead? And go and do some activities with her down in our playroom. So it's really a lot of being honest about where you are, which adults do not like to do. Adults do not like to admit that they struggle with emotional regulation, but y'all do. Adults do not like to admit that they don't have it sometimes, right? That everything ain't all good, that it's not fine. But if you are an adult who has neurodivergence, an intellectual developmental disability, or mental health challenges. All of those affect your emotions, your emotional regulation. And so being honest about that and having things in place in your house, I got my own common corner in your house to support you getting yourself together so you can get your kids together is important.
So were you diagnosed before or after your children?
After. So I was that nerdy girl who used to read books while she walked and walk into lockers and fall and walk in the ditches. I was put in gifted in kindergarten. And up until high school and leaving, I was in gifted. And when we were growing up in the 80s and in the 90s, if you were smart, nobody looked at the other behavioral things we know affects autism and ADHD. They didn't care about that because you're smart. So just go with the smart kids. You don't need friends. What you need friends for? Nerds don't have friends. You ain't see the Revenge of the Nerds. You just
Classic 80s movie.
Yeah, exactly. In most 80s movies, the nerd kid didn't have any friends, and that was okay. And so it was like, that's just a part of your life. And so when my children were getting diagnosed, when Supernova Mama was becoming what it was me looking at my children and them being like, oh yeah, her saying a sentence before saying words, that's a sign of autism. I was like, hold up. They were like, oh, her speaking in that tone and doing that verbal stimming, that's a sign of autism. I was like, I've been talking like that when I get nervous. But I was like, wait a minute. And so it was just so many things, sensory seeking, learning about sensory processing disorder, and learning about the internal senses that nobody teaches you, right? Because everybody talks about the 5 senses we know about, but no one talks about interoception or proprioception or vestibular. And so I can't even swing. Since I was a kid, I would sit in a swing and I would get nauseous just from rock. I want to swing with the other little girls and boys, so I would sit in it. And as soon as it started moving, couldn't do it. That's how bad my sensory processing is for vestibular movement. I'm in the car, I don't look at people driving. I have to read or something because it is so overwhelming for me.
So do you think that families with children with autism, the parents should get tested?
I absolutely do. So much so that we are on a waiting list for a program that Emory is looking at the genetics of it. Since my children were diagnosed, and then I was diagnosed after my children, and then what happened from that is my mom was like, well, if you autistic, maybe I am. And I was like, yeah, Shawty, you should go. Could have told you that. Love it. Who having 7 kids and can't even support one kid and just keep having the kids? Yeah, probably. But and so we're seeing that line in succession. And so it is not always genetic. Sometimes there are environmental factors. But I also tell people to remember that neurodivergence doesn't just mean autism. Sometimes it's OCD. Sometimes it's general anxiety disorder. Sometimes it's schizophrenia. Sometimes you can have some neurodivergence in the past in your family, bipolar disorder or something. And when it gets, how chromosomes mix and how we see what happens with genetics, it could move to autism in a child later on in that. So I do think that all parents who have children who are autistic should probably be tested for any type of neurodivergence, but also should probably do some genetic testing, some ID&Me. And I say that, and I haven't done it yet because I'm still a conspiracy theorist by heart, and I'm like, they trying to take our information.
Yeah.
So for our viewers, she mentioned a couple things. She mentioned that the power's out. We just had a Category 2 hurricane come through here last night. So I want to thank you again, Ms. Nelson, for coming, because a lot of people's power out, and we just pray for the city of Atlanta. I'm going to talk about navigating autism in communities of color, but what really stood out to me before I'm going to talk about that is ACEs. I want you to break down ACEs for our viewers, because that's a word that in the school system that we use so much when I was teaching, and I don't think the average person understands what ACEs is. And then we're going to talk about.
So it's adverse childhood experiences. And when I want you to think about when we say adverse, it's relative to a child, because sometimes I think we put on this adult hat and we're like, oh, well, everybody in the neighborhood had a mama who was a drunk. What's the big deal? But it's a child. It's from a child's perspective. It's from that child's perspective of living with someone who's dealing with substance abuse. It's like that child's perspective of living in poverty, of seeing your siblings be hungry and not being able to do anything about it, or of seeing your siblings be hungry and having to ask your brother to go to a store and steal bread and soup in his pants to feed them. It's the adverse childhood experiences of not having a home. And I don't mean just being homeless and on the street, even though there are children who experience that adversely. I mean couch surfing from family to family and not having one stable home. It's the adverse experiences of sexual abuse, because that does happen. And it's the adverse experiences of physical abuse. And I want to explain to you scientifically, neuroscience, there is no difference between a pop and a whooping. There isn't. In that child's brain, because we're talking about adverse childhood experiences, they are the same. Whether it's a pop or a whooping, they are being hit physically because they have done something wrong. And so in their mind now, when somebody else does something wrong, I need to fuck them up. And in their mind now, if I do something wrong, I'm supposed to be hit. I'm supposed to feel pain. These adverse childhood experiences, usually, especially children in poverty, they build up on one another. So you're usually not looking at a child who has one. If I'm a child who is the oldest of 7 children, and we do not have a stable household, so we are surfing in with different family, or we are maybe homeless, I'm probably like 70 to 85% going to have some type of physical abuse and sexual abuse, because that is the situation I am. I'm going to have hunger issues. Somebody around me is going to have a substance abuse issue, and I'm going to have an experience in that. I may even have to deal with some type of trauma and gun violence that happens because I'm living in poverty, moving from house to house, and I don't have anyone supporting me. So those are adverse childhood experiences.
Wow, that's pretty deep. So let's talk about those ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, and let's loop that back into the systemic barriers that we face in getting the diagnosis for autism.
Absolutely. So what a lot of people don't understand is trauma disorders like PTSD, like what can come from a child having ACEs, or even the parents in that experience. They're still in that experience, watching their children be hungry, being upset with themselves for not being able to kick a substance abuse issue. They have to get diagnosed in order to get support. And the diagnosis process, oh my God, it is the most bureaucratic. There's so much paperwork. There's so many meetings. There's so many wait lists. There's an appointment with your insurance company to figure out what clinic you can go to. And then you go to that clinic and the clinic says, oh, we have a wait list. So we're going to call you back in like 6 months to a year, and we'll see if we can get an appointment to get you evaluated to see if you are even able to be assessed. Because maybe you just made this all up. And then we have the great systemic racism that is in America, because without having the background of having 2 children that are diagnosed and not having the knowledge to understand what to say when I went to go ask for my diagnosis, all I'd be able to say is, well, I was really lonely when I was a kid, but now I'm married and I have children and I have friends. So that I don't have any social issues, right? That the doctor's not going to see that. And no, I don't like really looking at people and being around people, but I love helping people. So I just make myself useful in doing things for them. Well, you're a humanitarian. That's great. That's not a problem. And yeah, I'm always nervous. I'm always worried, but it's because I care about people. Okay, that's great. And then you get kicked out of the office and you don't know how to explain what actually is happening to you because you don't have the information. And so a lot of times you'll see parents. My mother, I saw, went in trying to explain the issues that were happening with her, but she didn't have the terms that we all know, how to tell a doctor what's happening to us. Her idea is, I'm tired sometimes. And, the kids be getting on my nerves and I never feel like I can spend any time with them. I'm always yelling at them. And the doctor's like, well, yeah, you're in poverty.
Yeah. Wow.
You got a job, 2 jobs. Of course you're not seeing your kids. I don't know what you want me to tell you. And they get sent away and they're not getting help and support. And so with navigating autism in communities of color, when we're talking about that, we really have to be aware of the fact that culturally, how autism shows up for us can be different. Getting outside of even gender and how it looks different for a Black female versus another white male. Yeah. It looks different for a Black boy and a white male. And so you have young Black men who have been socialized since they were born that you need to hide some of your Blackness in order to survive outside this household, right? So if I'm an autistic kid and I've already been told that I need to hide some of my Blackness, and then I do some of my autistic and I get beat up or I get picked on, I need to hide that too. So I'm going to mask. I'm going to look into the room and I'm going to find the kid who seems to be navigating this room the best. And I'm going to mimic everything he does. And sometimes I might do it too much and not enough. And I might get a little pick up, but I'm not getting beat up and I'm not getting ridiculed and I'm not getting constantly looked at all the time. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to pretend to be that kid and I'm going to lose myself. I don't know who I am, but I'm excelling in school. So everybody's okay. Everybody's good. But when I come home, I'm so overwhelmed by constantly being that kid that I'm lashing out at my family. And so my mom is saying, what's happening? Why is when he comes home, he's doing this, he's doing that. And the school might be like, he's doing pretty well in school. I don't know what you're seeing. I don't see that.
Which is crazy. And that's something that, we all working in the field see. And I know we got this a little later, but Jerron, we spoke about this off camera, but I feel like you had a real dope take as far as, Black men and autism went. And as we're on the topic, I would just love to hear your opinion in regards to Black men and autism.
Yeah, this is one that I feel like our community doesn't talk about enough. From Black individuals with autism, and we spoke about Black fathers who have individuals with neurodivergence or intellectual development disabilities. I feel like there's a couple of things I would touch upon with that. So number one is it's not talked about enough, right? We don't have an individual, a Black man out there really kind of putting himself out there, showing that it's acceptable, that it's okay to be who you are. Tasha spoke about the repression and, we can call it behavior contrast if we want to put behavior terms to it. But I think it's important that we really show up as a community, especially men, and say it's okay, right? It's okay if you're neurodivergent, it's okay to get help. It's okay to speak on that. Segueing from there to, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, but Black fathers who have kids with autism being, not even just, I'm not saying that we're not involved, but in Natasha, we talked about this off air, but being more willing, being participants, being able to go to certain things with them. I think because of our learning history as a community, you don't see it as much. You don't see it enough. So we're going to have some call to actions, but one of my call to actions is for our community to be able to promote that and create a space to reinforce that that's okay and to do so.
So I want to ask, right? And this is something we talk about a lot, right? And I want both of your opinions, right? There's a lot of fathers out there, right? As I have a son too, right? As your son gets to age, you want him to play sports, you want him to do certain stuff. Like, what advice would you give to those fathers, right? Because when you do get that diagnosis, and a lot of, especially, I speak as a Black man, we're in denial. Like, when the motor scale's a little off, you don't want to be like, oh no, we're gonna keep trying, Junior. Like, just keep shooting. When you really could be like, nah, something's a little off, right? So what advice, and we spoke about this often, I think you give great advice as far as this goes, but to those men, as far as, and Junior might be better at art, like football and basketball might not be his thing, music might be his thing. So What would y'all say to those fathers?
I'm gonna hop in quickly, then I'm gonna let you, cuz y'all know I'm a big proponent of this, but I'm such a big believer in community, right? Because we are connected, being able to have another man who has those shared experiences to be able to support somebody who's maybe been through that, what we call grieving process of being able to grieve, okay, this may not look the way you want it to look.
Yes.
So my bullet point, I'll let you jump in, is going to be find that community. And I think a platform like this is really a platform like this really helps to show, okay, we need to build that community. Find another man who's maybe going through that has been through that can give you advice. That way you can kind of navigate those barriers and challenges more as a father. So I can't speak to, because Joe, you have a kid. I can't speak to the kid part, but I can speak to the community part. And I think that's super important.
That's the hardest part, right? I have 2 Black dads, one that is accepted it. He understands from a terminology standpoint that he's his child's planned model. He is accepted the job of parent. He is going to reinforce his child, and he's accepted it. What I tell all my fathers is that no matter what life may look like, he may not be the best basketball player. He may not be the best football player. You're still going to be his hero. So, and that's the hard part of accepting just within the caseload that I have and parent training looks different.
It looks
Right?
completely
I'm
different.
going to tell you the terminology. I'm going to talk about DRA, DRI, pre-MAC, antecedent stuff, but I'm going to focus on show up at his school, show up at his events. If he has karate, be there. Provide that positive praise. Provide that tactile reinforcement, because he's going to need you. I might have to take a little moment after this, but he's going to need you.
And I'm going to hop in and I'm going to say that I think we forget that there are a lot of sports.
Yes.
Like, so maybe my clumsy butt could not do any team sports. It did not work out. I was throwing the ball too hard. The girls were complaining. It just did not work out. But track, I could do long distance running. I wasn't a sprinter, but I could do long distance running by myself. It helped me with my regulation, and it allowed me to do a sport because I wanted one for college. Tennis, golf. There are so many different sports, especially my Black people. We deserve and need to be in these other spaces. Gymnastics, that's a sensory seeker's dream. So looking at other sports, I know we in Georgia and it's all about football and basketball.
Speaking of that, I'm sorry. There's a big game tomorrow at 7:30. Georgia plays Alabama. We're going to talk about this later.
We will.
But, number 2, go Dogs.
So roll tide to that for all my listeners. But I think we're talking about some really important things right now. Joe, I want to get back to something that you said quickly in terms of parent training. I've been really on a quest lately to really shape that saying, because I feel like a lot of fathers, I've gone into their home and they're saying, hey, we're going to do parent training. And immediately that word has been like triggering for them. So one thing that I've really been trying to practice is culturally sensitive parent collaboration. When fathers are feeling like, okay, we're coming in and collaborate, like you're not coming in and training me, like we're collaborating on this together. And being able to pair and Joe, we talked about this off air, being able to pair myself enough to be able to reach them and really collaborate, because who am I to come in and train? I am an expert in behavior, but there's some things you're an expert in and we're going to collaborate on this. So I think no matter what culture, I know we're speaking about our Black community here, but being able to have that culturally sensitive collaboration in the way in which that you're collaborating with parents, because when parents feel like automatically you're coming in and telling me something, and I'm speaking to all my practitioners out there, particularly in our ABA field, but beyond that, mental health, there may be some kind of resistance there.
Correct.
And so my history has shown I've kind of made some mishaps too. It's like, I'm like, well, why he not connecting with me? It's because I've come in and it's like, even though I'm the expert, like I want to make sure that we're collaborating together. So I just want to make sure that our listeners know that, like, from my learning history, that's what's been really beneficial for me. Now,
so I'm gonna pop in and tell you this. Parent training doesn't just have to be in the home.
Talk about it, Joe.
So Coop and I had a client. And I met him at Chick-fil-A.
Yeah.
Yep.
I would meet dads over the Falcons games. It doesn't have to look the same. We don't have to have the books and the computers, and we're coming in the couch in the living room. Like, we have to meet parents where they are, especially parents in our community.
Yes.
So it doesn't look different. So I'm one that, hey, I'll go to the bounce house with you. We'll have parent training there. I'll go to his music choir, like recital, or his church.
Yeah.
And I'll have parent training there.
Yeah.
That's something I think in our field that we just kind of, it's got to be the book and it's got to be the terms, and hey, turn to page 68 and I'm gonna give you this paper and I need you to do this and take ABC data. No, it doesn't have to be like that all the time.
I love that you spoke on that, because that needs to be spoken about more, and you can go and you can build and you can do all those things and meet them where they're at. I want to quickly get back, thanks for that point, Joe, to this documentary. I just want to highlight it really fast. For those of you who haven't seen this documentary, Navigating Autism in Communities of Color. I was at the opening of the documentary here in Atlanta in Georgia Tech. Again, shout out again to Brianna Kelly, who linked us, and she was also in that documentary.
Yes, she was.
Can you quickly speak to our listeners about just the key takeaways and the highlights from that documentary, and then where they can find that documentary to watch it?
Absolutely. So one of the key takeaways was just making sure that you understood the intersections and that come with navigating autism in communities of color. Now, we spoke about some of those here at the table. We've talked about, how hard it is culturally. Most of the research that is done about autism is done on white males. Only very recently have we started seeing more different identities actually showing up. The CDC report, actually, the last report that they did showed that there were more people of color being diagnosed than white children just recently. I think it was 2020. Before that, it was known as a young white male situation. And so with that stigma already being there, y'all know how the Black community goes. That's a white people thing. That ain't got nothing to do with us.
All right, so I want to jump in here real quick, right? I want to ask you a question.
Yes.
I think that what is your opinion as far as getting tested early in the Black community, right? Because I feel like there's a conversation sometimes that, which I'm on the fence with it too, right? Of that there's teachers who can't deal with children, and it's easier to say they have ADHD, they have behaviors, they have autism, and put them in special education than to actually really figure out what's going on, right? But I also feel like early intervention is extremely important. So what would you say? I know it's kind of maybe a weird question.
No, it's a great question. And I'm gonna say, unfortunately, you're not gonna probably like my answer. It's kind of convoluted. PTSD shows up very similar to autism. You have cognitive issues, you have sensory issues, you have emotional regulation issues, you have social issues, you may have communication issues if you have trauma. If we're being honest, a lot of our Black families in poverty have trauma. We just talked about ACEs and what that looks like. And so a lot of times these children are showing signs that a teacher might see as autism, but it's because for some reason, and I'm going to say this, I don't care, we don't want to admit that 400 years of slavery and then many more hundreds of years of systemic racism does not mean that a group of people who you have systemically shut down from prospering and going forward are not going to have trauma genetically passed down, epigenetics, and therefore are going to struggle. So that child may have PTSD and they may not be able to perform in that classroom. And that teacher, not understanding post-traumatic slave syndrome, hello, Dr. Joy DeGruy, not understanding epigenetics, not understanding even ACEs, may see autism, but it's probably PTSD. The problem with that is not only does that teacher not see it, but when she recommends him to be referred to the SPED program, usually the psychologist, OT, SLP, and group monitoring and doing that evaluation don't see it. And so they say autism or bipolar disorder, because that's another one that we get misdiagnosed with a lot of times. And so, but I will say this, I would much prefer that a child be misdiagnosed with not bipolar disorder, but with autism, than for them to be put as a behavioral problem. And that's what we're really seeing.
Yes.
We're seeing Black boys, Black girls too, but mostly Black boys being said to be oppositionally defiant.
Yeah, ODD, EBD.
ODD and EBD. And and then you have a behavioral, not an IEP.
Yep.
And so you're not being supported. We need to teach you to do things. And behaviorism can work. I believe in a biopsychosocial nurturing environment for any child who is neurodivergent, who has mental health challenges, and who has an intellectual developmental disability. But if I'm only focusing on your behavior, but you have sensory issues, but you have cognitive issues, you have communication issues, I'm not helping you. I am what those older autistic adults complain about. I am shaping and forming you to just be able to conform in society. I'm not caring about your support needs.
That's heavy. That's heavy. There's so many things that I want to touch upon.
And that's the school to prison pipeline.
Which is next.
You are listening to Beyond the Science, brought to you by BNBA. We are live here in Atlanta with the brilliant Natasha Nelson. You spoke about adults, and I want to go here. One of our first episodes, Coop talked about how he wanted to have these conversations. ABA, also used to mean AKA behaviorism, behavior modification back in the day, has a history. When we weren't maybe as ethical, maybe when we weren't doing our functional analysis, where individuals were treated without dignity, without respect. And I'm a big believer in we move forward by acknowledging our past, not repressing it or not talking about it. Could you speak to our listeners about not only just a perception? I know we have adults out there who've had experiences, and I'm sure you may have been connected with them at some piece, but speak to them about just the perception of autism and not autism, is the perception of ABA, the implementation of it, particularly for older adults who may have received those services, and what your take is on it.
Absolutely. So I have many adult friends who are actually autistic, who are disability advocates. I am a member of the Georgia Council of Developmental Disabilities here in Georgia. I'm also a Georgia LIN, which is a leadership and education for neurodevelopmental disabilities trainee cohort, basically, where we get about 120 hours of education training on neurodevelopmental disabilities and different disabilities and how to advocate for those things. And so in doing all of that, I have a very large group of actually autistic adults that I have met, that I've built friendships with. And the biggest thing has been that in the past, ABA was very much kind of what we talked about, but not just for Black boys. It was for everyone. There was no concern about why you were doing this. It was more of, we're going to get some conditional or operant conditioning happening, classical or operant conditioning happening, and change whatever this behavior is without finding out why you're doing that or what you may need. And a lot of times the devices used to do that classical or operant conditioning were electric shocks, there was positive and negative reinforcers. There were, and these people have a lot of PTSD. You'll find a lot of autistic adults have PTSD from getting therapy to be more normal. That was basically the purpose. It wasn't to necessarily understand them and support them as much as it was to make them normal.
Yes.
And we do quotes with the normal. And so with that, a lot of autistic adults rightfully have a very, it's a trigger for them to even mention ABA. They got the dukes up. They ready to box immediately. And I come from an understanding of that. As Jerome said, I understand the history of it. I understand where they're coming from. However, here's my experience, I have all of this knowledge now. When my oldest daughter, who is 7, Paris, was getting diagnosed, I did not. And when she got her diagnosis, the only thing they gave me was a link to ABA, right? There wasn't any other things. And so I went to ABA Hope Bridge in Snellville. Okay. Shout out to them.
Shout out to Hope Bridge.
Shout out to Hope Bridge.
But I just remember I did have reservations because I had one friend at that time who was actually autistic. And she had given me a list of things she had said to demand, but to come in there asking happen. But when I sat down in that plan of care meeting, it was very much like, what do you want for Paris? What are the challenges you see? What are the weaknesses that you see? And then there was a what do you absolutely not want us to do? That question was asked before I could demand it. And so I was able to say that I practice positive discipline. And from my understanding and reading, which was limited at that time, but still, behaviorism seemed to be very reward and punishment. And positive discipline is more so about having that intrinsic motivation, explaining to a child why they need to go to the bathroom instead of giving them Cheez-Its to go to the bathroom, was how I explained it to her, and she laughed. And so and so it was me wanting to do more preferred activities as her reinforcement, as opposed to any type of food or toy or anything like that. And they listened. They were like, "That's fine. What are her preferred activities?" And then they also had 2 weeks where they weren't necessarily doing therapy. They were, but they weren't. They were getting to know my child, which is also another part of positive discipline. We call it connection before education or correction. It was a different experience for me. I did not have those situations happening. Now, I also think it's kind of important to share, that Hope Bridge graduates children once they go to school age. Yes. And they had, when I was talking to the BCBA, she was saying that it is her belief, and why she likes Hope Bridge and stays with Hope Bridge, that it's much easier to do behaviorism with children who are that small. But once they get older, there is a lot more of psychological, there's a lot more of social effects that come in. And as a behaviorist, you could run the line of harming a child not knowing those things.
And I just want to piggyback off of that for a second. I'm a super, super big advocate of Hope Bridge. That's where I started out my ABA journey, where I got my RBT training. A lot of companies out here, they aren't focused on graduating out kids, right? This is a business. And different companies have different business objectives, right? And the thing that I love about Hope Bridge is that, like, while I was there, I would say in a year I saw probably about 10 kids graduate out. What we have in ceremonies. And then it's dope that you said that in regards to the older kids. We go out there next week to Phoenix to meet up, and we have a conference out there. And I think that's something that's needed too. And with my company, Excellence Noir, and even with Adam's Behavior Consultant, that's something that's a big objective of ours. So even a goal that we've been having was to figure out if we can even partner or figure out how, to start implementing a program for the older kids and going in that direction. So I'm glad that you touched on that, to be honest.
Absolutely. And I think it's important because I know when we were talking, you talked about Excellent Noir. Is that correct?
Yes, Excellence Noir.
Excellence Noir being about helping those adults to do activities of daily living or specific skills. And I think that's kind of important because then they're giving their feedback. They're saying, hey, I want to learn how to cook food for myself, or hey, I want to put myself on a schedule. When I talked to those adults who, went through the past ABA, what they talk about is a lot of times there wasn't a question of them. It was their parents and a psychologist deciding this was what they needed to learn and do. Again, their psychological and social elements weren't really considered, as opposed to an adult saying, hey, I really struggle with keeping myself on a routine to get my hygiene done, and I just need help with that, right? That's a totally different thing.
We want to move off the clock. All right, everybody who are listeners, are our loyal listeners out there, wherever you get your podcast, you guys know this segment is probably Coop's favorite segment. So we want to get into Off the Clock with Natasha, and I'll let you take it away, Coop.
Okay, awesome. So we're going to jump into your military experience. I want to know what branch you are a part of, right? And then off the camera, we spoke about how you had an Apple MacBook with a bullet hole in it. All right. So I want to know the story behind the MacBook with the bullet hole in it.
So I am an Army veteran. I was in the U.S. Army. I was in from 2008 to 2015. So that gives you a little idea of the times. I had 2 deployments, but my first deployment was what I call a real deployment, and my second deployment was a fake deployment. Okay. And what I mean by that is my first deployment was when we were really in the thick of actual war. And so I lived in a hut with 6 other people. I am by trade at that time, I was what is called a 25 November. That's our MOS. What that actually means in layman terms is I'm a network operator and maintainer. I build networks to make sure that the whole FOB has communications so that they know where people are, so that they communicate with one another and everything like that. I'm very lucky because the machinery has to stay cold to work. So Afghanistan was getting to 126 degrees. I would be in my shop doing the things. But we were continually attacked that first deployment. So there was like, I wouldn't say a day that we didn't hear some type of rocket launch, something happening. But the day that my laptop got it done to it, my soldier was actually in the guard post. And they attacked. They were actually attacking the FOB, trying to take over the FOB. And he manned that guard post by himself because at the time we had a partnership with the Afghani police force. And whoever was supposed to be in the guard post with him ran and left. So my soldier was there alone. We had to do a mission to go and support and save him from our forces. We all had to get out of our huts because this was like early in the break dawn. So most of us had on like underwear, stuff, and we had to get in and get that done. And when after everything was done, after we were good, I went to get my MacBook, which was my first MacBook that I'd ever bought, because this is 2010, and I believe I bought it in 2009. And it had a bullet hole in it, but it was still working.
Wow.
And I was so thankful because I'm a millennial, so I had all my LimeWire.
Oh, man. LimeWire, where is that now?
LimeWire is crazy.
And I was the DJ on the FOB. Like, I had the DJ app, and even when we getting shot at, we still party. So we would have a little club on the FOB where people would try to dance in their fatigues and in their PT uniforms. Cool. And I was the DJ there. It still works. So I was like, well, it's still working. And it worked a good 5 extra years after that. And so I was a voting registration officer in 2016 election. And I registered 3,000 people in Germany to vote absentee, taught them how to do the absentee and everything. And so I was very much into that election. And that morning in November, we've already discussed I'm autistic. I take morally right things. This is the right thing. This is how it has to go because, of course, America sees that this is just a celebrity with money who's just talking nonsense. America's going to be smart. No. I was like, I did not get out of bed. I had school. I did not go to school. I was done for. I was really upset about it. So, yeah.
Well, that was brought to you by Coop. That's his Off the Clock.
Off the clock, baby. I love it.
You never know what Coop's going to say. So, audience, just get ready. It could be, you just never know.
Can we do like an Off the Clock, like a compilation for him? Maybe we'll put it out on YouTube.
I'm just glad that Coop hasn't followed my social media because he might have asked about my twerking because I do that regularly.
Oh yeah. Yes, I did see that on your Instagram as well. I don't know why we didn't talk about that. Yes.
You take a little 2 minutes now. You know what I'm saying?
Hit it.
But going back to a more serious topic. And I think this topic really came to mind when, you recently had a conference of sorts where you talked about the intersection of police, race, and disability. So one of the clients in my company, his mother had to call the police because he eloped. And I was on the phone. So we had to have those conversations of, hey, make sure you tell the cop, don't come with the sirens, don't come speeding, don't just rush up on them, kind of just, So basically I'm telling her, and she knows just his precursors as to what his behavior may change in that moment. So can you talk about that? Can you talk about the need for that?
Absolutely. So my oldest daughter, Paris, is 7. and she is an eloper, big eloper. The first time she did it, our backyard is completely fenced in. And she was in the backyard. We have a trampoline. We have, all the things to help her with sensory and things in the backyard. And she hopped the fence. And she was in our neighbor's yard, but we didn't know that. So we're freaking out. I've called 911. They were like, how long has it been since you've seen? I was like, 1 minute, but still, listen, this is serious. Because she was, I want to say 4 at the time, and she hopped the fence. And she heard the dogs in the neighbor's yard, and she wanted to go see the dog and see what was happening. So it's always important to understand that eloping isn't always necessarily fear. Sometimes impulsivity issues happen for children, and so they'll get an idea in their head and they'll just go. The last time it happened, though, was when we definitely realized we needed to do some concrete action. Because we thought that was a one-off situation. We put in different things in place. She doesn't go outside without one of us being out there with her, all those different things. But the second time, I am a neighborhood auntie mama. So all of my neighbor babies come over and play in my children's sensory playroom because they've never seen anything like it. They think it's amazing. They come and ask me for homework. They usually come and ask for a snack. All of the neighbor kids come. And so one of the neighbor babies is a middle schooler, and she was really struggling with math, and she asked for my assistance. And I was helping her. And my daughter came in and she said to me, the oldest, the eloper, Children's Museum. And I said, no, Paris, we can't go right now. We'll go this weekend. And then she left. She didn't say anything. And I was helping the baby, and then I didn't hear any jumping around. I didn't hear any verbal stimming or anything like that. When your kid's quiet, And so I came out and looked. Door was wide open. There was a rolly chair because we had a top lock to keep her secure in. She had the rolly chair. She put it next to the door, climbed to get the top lock and open it, and left out. Terrified. Thankfully, because I am a neighborhood mama auntie, all of the neighborhood joined together. Children called their parents, people on trucks, all looking for her. We called the police, and she was with someone in the neighborhood, and we were able to get her back. But she basically decided to walk to the Children's Museum. But with the police coming and asking us questions, I immediately got tight in my chest because it was like they were questioning my parenting instead of understanding. When I called, I said my child was autistic and an eloper. So then I said, okay, I don't think you understand autism. He says, no, I don't, but I understand that you need to watch your child. And I said, hold up, Big Swole up. And so that was when...
Whoa, wait a minute now.
Hold up, Big Swole up.
Wait a minute.
And so I asked for his badge and his name, and I got his badge and his name. And then I took some time to regulate because, you don't... I'm going to be real. We're here in this space. With Black people, we have to really walk that line of not being the angry Black person. But still, a lot of things are righteously, we should be the angry Black person. Like, I'm allowed to be the angry Black person because you are a police officer that does not understand neurodivergence and mental illness. Everyone who's on a force should know those things. But you can't, that's not how you educate people. If you come at them with shame and judgment and guilt, they are not going to be open to anything you have to say. And so I had to regulate. I had to bring my anger down. I had to do all the things that Black people have had to do for centuries if they want to have any change happen. And then I dressed my family up. And not my husband, he's a grown man. He dresses himself up. But, and then we went to my local police station. And I came and I said, my entire family is neurodivergent and has some type of mental health challenge. And I want to make sure that there's a record of that with our faces. And how to come to our home when you are assisting and supporting us, because that is what I understand that the police force is supposed to be about, is assisting and supporting the citizens. And I am a citizen of you. And so therefore, I would like you to understand that I have autism. My 2 daughters have autism and ADHD. My oldest daughter is non-speaking, or minimum speaking is what I call it. But you're going to call it non-speaking because if you come and talk to her, she's not saying a lick of nothing to you. I want you to understand that my husband has a mood disorder. And so if there's a high risk situation happening, he might not want to talk to you because he has trauma connected to the police because he's Jamaican and Panamanian. So I want you to see our faces and understand that how you come to our home will be different than how you come to other homes. And surprisingly, they were very open to it. And they asked for me to teach a class. And so things like sensory and the idea that the alarm, the sirens, it's overwhelming and could scare an autistic child or autistic adult. The fact that if you come to a parent who has an autistic child and is already in a high stress situation, probably in panic mode, and you come at them aggressively blaming them for what is happening, you are not going to be calming the situation down or going for a solution. You are escalating the situation. And that was very helpful. But it also put me into mind that when I told my mom I was doing it, she was like, why are you doing that? Then they're going to have y'all on the list. And then because there is so much distrust between the Black community and police. And so when I told my mom I was going to tell my other parents to do it, she was like, you teach Black and Latina and Asian fam. They not finna do that because then the police have pictures of them and have a record of them and have an idea of them, and they can try to flip the script and they can build another narrative and all these different things. I try to explain to my mom, we are going to have a label no matter what.
That's facts.
This is a big thing for me because it's also a thing that I get with parents when they don't want to diagnose their children. I don't want to label him. I don't want to put that label on him. I was the weird, nerdy girl my whole goddamn life. I already had a label. It just wasn't autistic. It was a label. Everyone knew I was the girl that would read and accidentally fall in a ditch or almost get ran over because I was so into the book. Everyone knew that I couldn't stop myself from talking about topics that I really enjoyed. Everyone knew that I would bite my nails down to the white meat because I would be anxious or nervous about something. They knew these things about me, and I was the weird, nerdy, smart girl. So you get labels because you live and experience around society and people. If that label's going to get me medical care, support, and understanding, give me the damn label.
And I want to piggyback because, I come from a law enforcement background. My father worked at Rikers Island for 20 years. Stepmom was a warden there. But even coming from a law enforcement background, I'm also a Black man, so I kind of see both sides of the spectrum. I think that it is something that is needed, and what you spoke on as far as when you had the conversation and they were kind of like, we don't know. And I think that as a community, there is a distrust between law enforcement and, our people, and that's a real thing, whether people want to admit it or not. And I think that even from this podcast, our goal with creating this is to create a community, and we should move forward as far as creating a connection with law enforcement and autism and neurodiverse people. And because to me, what resonated with me was the fact that for them to say, you're right, we don't know what to do. Like, instead of saying like, hey, we're good. Hey, what you said, the comment of like, oh, learn how to control your kids. Like, that's crazy to say, and that's kind of the response that we expect. But the response that personally I didn't expect was, oh yeah, come in and teach us and come in. And that's something that, we can create as behavior analysts, as parents, as someone on a spectrum, to really come through and put a program together to be like, hey, like, let's really have this conversation.
Yeah. So, and that's some good stuff there, Coop. I appreciate the work that you're doing. And I'm sure that there are policemen out there who have not had any training. What I want to ask you is, if I'm sure there are the police officers that are watching right now who don't know how to interact with Black disabled kids, quickly, what would you say to them to really kind of educate them, or what would you tell them for how they should or could interact with individuals with intellectual development disabilities?
So, autism is a spectrum disorder. Unfortunately, it really does look different from child to child. However, there are 5 pivotal things that are very much influenced by this neurological disorder, and that is communication, social interactions, motor skills, executive function, and sensory. And I know out of all of those, you said, what is executive function? Executive function is the air traffic controller of your brain that helps you to be able to have mental flexibility and then your impulse controls, right? So think about all the things that cover. That covers you being able, some people have what we call time blindness, to where they don't know how long things take. Literally, it doesn't feel the same to them as it feels to you. There's people who struggle with transitioning from one task to the other, or being flexible to seat arrangements, being flexible to job movements, different things like that. And then there's organization, actually being able to organize your things. All of those are a part of executive functioning, right? So why is that important for a police officer to know? Well, your siren overwhelms me. Your demeanor when you come in overwhelms me. You're not coming in as a collaborator. You're coming in as an authority figure. And a lot of autistic people have a profile called PDA, which means we are very much pathologically avoidant of oppressive forces, people telling us what to do, people controlling us. And it's probably a trauma response because people like to control nonverbal autistic people, but I'm not going to get into that. But if you're coming in as an authority force who knows everything, who is very much aggressive, who has this loud siren, and isn't asking questions, isn't trying to control the situation, which happens a lot, you are going to be met with a confrontational person who is already in a high stress response. And we know what a high stress response is, right? That's fight, flight, freeze, or fun. And it always depends on the situation. If I met with someone trying to control me, I'm fighting, shawty. If I'm met with someone trying to control someone I love, I'm fighting, shawty. So if you're coming in maybe with your siren not blaring and you come in and you're asking questions, if your voice isn't taking that authoritative, I'm the law here, but is more so taking that I'm here to help. What can I do to help you, right? If you're asking them what they need instead of telling them what to do, you may get more of a response from an autistic adult or a child who is in need of assistance.
Adams Behavior Consulting, what we do, we will train police officers, firefighters. So you can contact me. I'll put my link in the chat.
You put your link in the chat, man. Wow, fellas, if y'all know we will be getting all this knowledge
and I
today.
need that link too for my educational resources for my parents.
Oh, yes. so I don't want to put. Am I allowed to put that out there?
You can put that out.
All right, so I'm just gonna give a snippet of this resource that she's putting together. It's a one-stop shop. I got a small peek of it, but it's going to be a very valuable resource for whatever that you do need, the parent, caregiver, like what services you may need. So I don't want to spoil it, but I'm putting it out there that when that's published and we get all the graphics and it looks everything putting up, it's going to be amazing. So I want to quickly transition to Supernova Parenting Summit. Now, we just had our inaugural BMBA conference. It was amazing. Great conference. Shout out to everybody who was at the conference. So we know firsthand how much work goes into these things. So I would love for you to give an overview of this amazing summit that you have coming up, the goals, any of the panels or workshops that you want to talk about, and just what it means to you and what can we expect.
Absolutely. So Supernova Parenting in itself is a foundation that was built to empower parents and caregivers of families of color facing mental health challenges, neurodivergence, and intellectual developmental disabilities by providing education, support, and resources. And so that is basically the guidelines of this summit. We wanted to get families of color, navigating these spaces, some education. That's why we have workshops. That's why we have some interviews. We also even have panels, which I'm excited. I'm going to talk about in a little bit. But then also having a space for you all to connect. Because what I find is a lot of times it is very lonely to be a parent of a child who has a neurodivergence or intellectual developmental disability or mental health challenges. People aren't very kind to different. And so you'll have parents that'll be like, oh, your child hit my child one time when they were having a tantrum. They can't play together anymore. Oh, your child is always making noise. And we know these things. It happens. And so these parents, or this parent hasn't accepted, they've gone through the grief process, but they aren't at acceptance. Yeah. And they don't feel comfortable going out with their child. And so they're staying in the house. And you need connections. You need community. Jerome spoke on that. It is so important to have community and have community that understands. Yes, beat up your family and make them understand too, but community that is living the experiences you are living and understand. And so that connection of finding other parents of color who are dealing with this was important to me. But then also the resource library. We do not get considered for resources until very recently. It's starting to grow now. We have this amazing organization. We have Supernova Parenting. But realistically, we see that the numbers now of a family and children of color getting diagnosed with neurodivergence and intellectual developmental disabilities has surpassed white children. But the resources to support that need have not. They're not showing up. They're not there. There isn't a very cultural awareness. And we're seeing also a lot of times that Black personnel, I'm not going to speak for every other color because I'm Black, so I'm going to speak for Black personnel who are BCBAs, who are RBTs, who are SLPs, who are OTs, who are parent educators. They aren't in the spaces that get the money and the funding. And so you don't have a lot of resources for these families. And so the few and the proud that I know will support these families and usually will do it for free, I want parents to easily be able to assess them. So that's important to me. But you're also going to get education. I don't think people understand how important it is to understand why your child is doing the things they are. I give the example all the time because people don't think it's real, but it's real. When your child has smeared poop all over the playroom, and you like, why are you even touching? You don't smell that? Why are you touching the poop? Why are you putting it in your mouth? What is wrong with you? That's really what's going through your head. And if you understand sensory processing disorder, you would understand why it's happening. So the education is so important. So understanding what executive function is and how it shows up in a child's behavior and how you can support it. Understanding sensory processing disorder, how it shows up in the child and how you can support it. Understanding that your child may not talk. That does not mean they cannot communicate.
Say that again.
I talk so much, but listen to me because I'm autistic. There is not one reason why autistic people do not talk. There are multiple reasons. We talked about sensory. I want you to think about all of the muscles and body parts that are used for you to speak. You got teeth, you got tongue, you got lips, you got larynx, you got all of these things, jaws. All of these things are working together to speak. If I'm a sensory processing disorder and I have multiple sensors going to my brain, overload for all of those things, I may have trouble moving those things in the correct context to make words. If I am a sensory avoider, it may be hurtful, painful for me to actually speak because of the different things that have to go into speaking, right? Let's move from that. Language processing. Believe it or not, people process language differently. It's why I believe earlier I talked about the fact that one of the signs of autism is a child saying whole sentences instead of words as their first word. Some of us are gestalt processors. And so we process language in chunks. I'm one of them. My first words to my family was, "What you got?" Because I was a real chunky baby. And every time people would have food, I would come up to them and say, "Whoa, what you got?" And that was my first words. Because instead of understanding A as makes the I sound and B makes the bus sound and C makes the cuss sound, and when I put those words together, I can make a word. That's not how it went. To me learning full chunks, songs, scripts is what we call them, of people talking and reiterating that out and understanding the meaning of that. So that could be a reason why your child isn't talking. They are processing in chunks, and then out of nowhere, they turn 9 to 10 years old, and all of a sudden they telling you a whole dictionary of talking and understanding. And then there's also anxiety. I just talked about the fact that our executive function in our brain of time flexibility, of time management, of time organization is affected. That sensory all throughout our bodies and internally, how we experience movement, how we experience our body in itself, and how we experience our body in relative to gravity are all affected by sensory processing and then communication. And so if I know that, and this is what happened to me when I was a kid, and is slowly going away as I get therapy. When I step in a room, I'm constantly thinking about, okay, don't do this, don't do that. Make sure that everybody isn't looking at you. Make sure that you say the right thing. Okay, when that person gives you something, thank them and then give them something back. Constantly, every interaction is overanalyzed. And for some autistic people, that can be so overwhelming. They're just like, I ain't gonna speak. I'm not gonna do it. Yes. And so there are different reasons why an autistic child doesn't speak. And if you're not focused on the why, and you're just trying to make them speak, you could be in for a very hard situation, not just for you, but also for that child.
Man, nuggets, man. We're getting a lot of nuggets here today, fellas. Getting a lot of nuggets here today. I want to encourage all of our listeners to register, to sign up for this summit. Okay,
Yes.
You need to be at this summit. Parents, caregivers, even practitioners, we can learn from it this summit as well. Yes. Where can we find this summit? How can we register?
Supernova Parenting, SUPER, hold on, NOVA PARENTING. I told you I was autistic. I literally had to visualize those words
and
in my brain.
We're going to drop it in the thumbnail as well.
.org. But yes, it has a self-identifying panel. A lot of times I think parents think of autism, of neurodivergence, ADHD as children disorders. I'm a whole ass adult. I'm grown. I'm a veteran. I have 2 children. I'm married. I have a nonprofit, and I am still autistic. It is still there. Okay. And so I wanted to give examples of a non-speaking autistic person, of a young college student autistic person, of a mother who's an autistic person, of a single person who is really struggling and trying to make it work, autistic person. I wanted you to get examples and to hear from those very real adults. So we have a self-advocate panel and on the first day, and then on the second day, we have a professional panel. So you're going to hear from school psychologists, SPED teachers, OTs, SLPs, and social workers.
ABA.
Yeah. Oh, no. Brianna has her own her whole own live interview.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Job,
Because
Bree.
we wanted to have the conversation about ABA and be realistic about the history and about the cultural references. And I thought Brianna was perfect for that. And so she has her own personal live interview talking about that.
Another shout out to Bree. We appreciate you.
Yes.
So we're excited about this summit. So we want to make sure that all our listeners who are listening to register for that summit. We're looking forward to it. We're supporting it. I'm registering for that summit. So thank you for sharing that with us. I also want to encourage our listeners to just follow all the work that you're doing and supporting you. When I first found out about you, I kind of went to your Instagram. First of all, go to your Instagram page. You see a lot. You will see twerking. You will see advocacy. You will see important conversations. But you really are getting everything with on your page.
I'm a
it's true.
whole human. I think it becomes this thing of it's important for me to have people see a disabled person be a whole human.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not trying to run for office. I'm a human. I love twerking. I'm from Georgia. I was twerking the kilo at Freaknik at 4 years old. My mama wanted to go, so she said, "Come on, baby, I'm gonna pack you in the back."
You said,
Can we cut that out?
I was there too.
and so that is a part of me. But what I tell people all the time is, I grew up where we twerked with like our cousins at barbecues and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I remember the first time a boy jumped behind me at a school dance when I was twerking. I was like, "What are you doing?
Yeah.
This is not for you.
Right.
This was for the girls." I didn't even understand that aspect of it. So yeah, I'm a whole human. I do human things. I think that's important. As me coming out as a Black woman who is autistic, who has ADHD, is OCD, I think it's important for me to show that I have multitudes. I like to call myself a Renaissance woman because we always hear Renaissance man, so I say Renaissance woman. And so I'm interested in all different things. I'm very much an intellectual, but I also like anime. I'm a geek. And I like to twerk. It is what it is. And I like whiskey.
What's your favorite anime?
Hunter x Hunter. And I'm not, and I know it's supposed to be just Hunter x Hunter, but no, Hunter x Hunter.
She said, don't add
her. and I'm standing on it.
I love it. She's standing on business.
Yeah.
She's standing on business, fellas. This is, we've talked about, everything. We talked about the summit. We got into Black fathers, police. We talked about the documentary. Please watch the documentary. We want to take the time to just thank you for making time. Again, as Joseph mentioned, we had storms. We had to literally push his podcast recording back today because we lost power. I still don't have power in my house right now. So we just want to take the time to thank you and all the work that you're doing in our community. Please keep it up.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for what you do. We talked about this offline, but for me, it has been so important to find a Black male. I don't want to say like me, but a Black male who is autistic or has some type of neurodivergence and is open to being them and being open about that. I always understand that there is a reservation there and why that reservation is there. We have a history of being scientifically degenerated for being Black, right? And then that's the aversion to being slow and all of the different things. All of that is real. So I get it. I also get that I am conventionally attractive, light skin, all of the things. And so it's easier for me to come out and be open about I am neurodivergent and it is what it is. I get that. But it is needed. It is so needed. And so I thank you. It's not necessarily a young male coming out and saying, but it is a platform that lets a young male see that there are people out there supporting them. And so maybe that'll make him more comfortable with coming out and being like, I'm autistic too, and I need these supports. And it is what it is, and I am who I am, and this is how we go forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, we can do a part 2. We got a lot of stuff that we can talk about here. We do a part 2. We got a lot of stuff we can talk about. But seriously, guys, follow Natasha wherever you get Instagram, wherever you can find her. Please follow her. So this is going to be interesting. I can't wait to get this one out. We are on the road next week. We are heading to Arizona, and we're going to be live at that conference. We'll be talking more about that in a minute. But thank you again. We look forward to continuing to follow your journey. Please support her and all that you're doing, and we really appreciate what you're doing with the community. Can we get some cheers here, guys? And Natasha, thanks for having you on the show.
Yes. Thank you for having me.
So until next time, guys, you guys will see us soon. Our next one will be in Arizona, and I appreciate all the support as always, and we'll talk to you guys soon.